Well, Leanne, why don't we go
So,
ahead and get things started so we can.
Sounds good. Sounds good to me. Well, happy Monday, everybody, and good afternoon. I'm Leanne Fleischer with NOAA, and today for our Tiny Talks Builder Day, we have a young lady by the name of Gabrielle Cloudis. Am I saying that correct? Cloudis? She is with Settled in St. Paul, and she's going to tell us today about the story of how they her dream of building homes to help the homeless in St. Paul and how that all came to fruition. And she is part of NOAA, and we all went through a little bit to help get these homes certified. And she's going to talk to us about that in the future for Settled. So hopefully you guys will enjoy that. And I'm going to turn it over. Oh, before I do that, I'm just going to let you guys know you're being recorded, which you already know. We record these so we can put them in our member portal. So we have your permission. If we don't have your permission, then just hide your face. So anyway, if you have questions for Gabrielle, if it's a burning, urgent question, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we can ask that. Or if it's something that can wait till the end, we will wait till the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robin. You want to start with Gabrielle first? And if I have something, I'll step in and ask, but I'll let you go for it.
All right. Welcome, everybody. So happy to have you here. You know, we were just talking before we got on that we are on, I think, number 46 of these. And boy, I tell you, it's been an interesting ride. We have a lot of value in our member portal. If you have missed some of these, they are all listed in there in our video library. And we were thinking about possibly adding some value at our sales meeting today, about adding some value to the builders that are out there. And one of the things was a drip campaign. And in that drip campaign, send out little snippets or some of the items that are in the video library, because you don't always click on that. But if it came in an email with just a link that you could listen to it. Yes, last Thursday's was so interesting about dielectric tests that I sent that information over to Colorado. And Sam got back to me this morning and said he was going to take a look at it. So there's a lot of value in that, guys. And the other thing, before we get started with Gabrielle, is any of you builders that have sales, we want to know that information. We want to know that data, because we're doing value opinions. They're not appraisals, they're value opinions. And we need data to support our value opinions. So what we will do, and this will be going out in an email to everybody, we will pay anybody that fills out the form a $25 Home Depot gift card. So those of you that are building tiny houses and buying from Home Depot, this would be another way for you to generate some revenue just by telling us, you know, a little bit about the tiny house that you have had a sale. It has to be a sale within the last 12 months. But other than that, that's really what we're looking for, is a tiny house on wheels that was sold in the last 12 months and a few of the details on that. So with that said, you know, I am going to turn everything over to Gabrielle. Gabrielle, let's start out with having you introduce yourself, tell a little bit about yourself and your background and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, guys. I'm a researcher at the University of Minnesota. That research began about 7 years ago and turned into a nonprofit that we call Settled, sort of putting the research into action. So I have a doctorate in housing studies, and just look at housing studies from a place of how do we serve people that are in poverty. Specifically, we look at people that are in chronic homelessness, which is sort of by federal definition, have been in homelessness for a year or longer. Most of the people that we've served have been on the streets for a decade or more. Kind of a few years into our research, we started looking at tiny homes as one possibility for generating affordable housing. I think that every major metro is struggling, I mean, across our nation is struggling with affordable housing and is struggling with homelessness. And so at the time, there was about a dozen tiny home villages, specifically looking at this population across the nation. Now there's probably 3 or 4 dozen, but one really sort of stood out. Most of those were very small congregations or small communities, but there was one in Austin, Texas called Community First Village. At the time, it was 250 tiny homes. It's now 500. So it's just a massive community. But what makes it really distinct and different from any other tiny home village that exists in the entire nation is that you have resource people living in the community alongside people coming out of chronic homelessness. So almost, I mean, you really can't see a housing project like that. You might see housing vouchers where you're sort of tucking people that are coming from places of poverty into market rate housing, but it's really not the same. They, those resource neighbors didn't ask to live next to them. Most often can't relate with their backgrounds. So what was happening in Austin?
Let me check in with you here real quick, Gabrielle, before we get too far into some of the details. Can you tell us a little bit about Settled, when it started, and what type of a organization, a nonprofit that it is?
Sure. So Settled began in 2018, birthed at the University of Minnesota out of that research, and it is a 501c3 nonprofit.
Okay, and when you have a nonprofit like that, you have to spell out what you're going to do. What is your bylaws or whatever say Settled is designed is created for?
We are created for sustainable housing, purposeful work, and supportive community. So essentially, we manufacture tiny homes. We train up congregations to have tiny home villages on their land, and we walk through that development process and do all the city conversations needed to sort of do any land use or building code sort of amendments.
Do you mostly work with churches?
We only work with churches. Yep.
Only, okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, but usually across the nation, the zoning laws are different when it comes to a church as opposed to anything else. Churches can get away and do with a whole lot more than I know in our area in Maryland. When I was living there, there was a church in a neighborhood that was zoned for residential, but because it was a church, it was allowed to be there. Is that what you're finding out? Does the fact that the home is on church property help with getting the zoning to approve a tiny house?
That's right. That's what we found from sort of really studying deeply what was happening in Austin, Texas. It was beautiful and amazing what was happening there. But the reason that they were able to get that zoned was because Texas is one of 3 states that doesn't have local zoning laws outside of city limits. But that wasn't a scalable solution. We wanted to find something that could be scaled across the nation. And so what we found was a very strong federal land use law called the Religious Land Use Act, which essentially allows religious organizations to use their land in conjunction with their mission. So that was really a sort of like a really golden aha moment to us. So any church, synagogue, mosque that wanted to build an intentional tiny home community on their land, there could still be that not in my backyard sort of pushback, which is essentially the number one reason we don't build affordable housing. But at the end of the day, it's really going to fall flat. And there could be resistance and pushback from regulators and this, city, county. But again, the federal law is incredibly strong.
Can you say that federal law again? And Leanne, can you type it in the chat for everybody? What is that law called?
Yeah, it's called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act.
Okay, that might be useful for some of our builders that are trying to do some things. Yeah, so that's great. So anyway,
Wait 1 second. the the Religious Land Use and
Institutionalized Persons Act.
the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
It's good stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, so anyway, yeah, go ahead and continue on. I know you've got a story to tell us about how you were able to accomplish some things, but it took you a little while to get those. Can you start from the beginning of that and tell us where you are now with it?
Sure. So essentially, we saw just how beautiful this community was in Austin, Texas, with resourced neighbors sort of having this calling to live in the community alongside people that were coming out of homelessness. So, you know, you've got Larry and Wendy Smith. Larry is the CEO of $1 billion tech company. I'm sitting in his tiny home and I'm saying, Larry, why are you living next to the formerly, you know, chronically homeless, drug addicts, prostitutes, and convicted felons, and telling me that it's your distinct privilege to live here? Like, this is mind blowing. And so just hearing that, you know, they lived in the wealthiest community of Austin, Texas, a gated community, and yet they were really disconnected from their neighbors, and just what it was like to really come into a community where you are, you can sort of showcase your own poverty that we all have, and sort of be vulnerable and honest, and because your neighbors are people that are coming from pretty raw places, it's pretty easy to just connect on a really deep human level. And so
wait a minute. Did you say this guy's a multi-millionaire or billionaire?
he's the CEO of $1 billion tech company.
Wow. And, you know, that reminds me of, Zappos. You know, he was a very wealthy CEO of Zappos, and he lived in a tiny house community there in Las Vegas with his llama, and he had Airstreams and tiny houses, and that's all he had. So it's just mind blowing that somebody that is a billionaire, quote unquote, you know, would choose to live tiny. But that's really a great story.
Yeah, it is. You know, and I sat in lots of intentional neighbors' homes and listened to their stories of how they ended up in this village of, you know, predominantly people coming out of chronic homelessness, and just heard again and again and again that it was their privilege to live there, like that maybe they were drawn there as a way of living a life of service, but what they found was that it really enriched their lives in lots of ways. It didn't, you know, sort of deepen your empathy, increase your communication with your, you know, your adult kids, strengthen your marriage, all of those things. And so I think that just speaks to the power of community. Our intent with Settled wasn't to just create a tiny home village in St. Paul. I mean, that's fine, and we needed to do it to be able to test what we were, this model that we were putting together, but we wanted to create something such that, I mean, you know, they've had more than 900 organizations come to them asking, you know, how do we do this in our community? So many people are asking, how do we develop something like this? And so our intent and desire was to create a model such that anyone with a heart to create an intentional community with our homeless neighbors could go back to their community and do this. And so that's how we landed on the Religious Land Use Act that really overcomes local zoning law, which is an enormous barrier. It's how we landed on tiny houses on wheels that overcomes the building code. It's how we landed on purposeful work. You know, our folks all have a desire to wake up every day and be needed and seen and valuable and wanted, but they're not going to get a job in the regular market, and so we needed to create opportunities for them to have that role.
How do you do that, Gabrielle? I know that in Austin, Texas, they have a garden and they grow things and they sell them. They have a craft shop and they make crafts and they sell them. They have a auto repair shop where people are learning, you know, repairing people's cars and things like that. And so the people that are actually living in that community have been able to quote unquote work within that community to create an income. How do you do that with your project?
Yeah, well, there's a huge scale component to this, right? So in Austin, well, it's Texas. I mean, gosh, everything's bigger in Texas, right? I remember coming back from the community in Austin, Texas, and presenting this to our county commissioners here in Minnesota, and like the chair of the county commission stood up and she said, well, this isn't Texas. And I was like, oh, gosh. Okay. So I'm actually from Austin, Texas, and have that, like, you know, big, bold Texas spirit inside me. But I live in Minnesota now, and it's very, very buttoned up. And so in lots of ways, it forced us to really think about like, how can this really scale? And so work was one of them. Like in Austin, Texas, they have an art house. They have a blacksmithing forge. They have 7 acres of organic gardens. Like, how are we going to scale that if we had a community of 6 homes on a little church property? And so one of the ways in which we've done that is been really thoughtful about the government benefits that our folks get and how to keep the most cash in their pocket. And what we found was that they can work off their rent through tasks around the community. So we have a sign-up sheet in the common house. Everyone can sign up a week in advance for things like clean the kitchen, clean the shared showers, clean the men's bathroom, women's bathroom, and so on. And so we've learned the hard way not to pay people by the hour, but we just, people can sign up, and by task, they can reduce their rent. And they can reduce the rent up to $150 a month. And then the rest of the rent needs to be paid in cash. And we just talk about always reinforcing that idea of community. Like, hey, we really do need you to pay your rent every month on time, because we really do have electric bills or internet bills or water bills. And so it just reinforces.
What is the rent for one of your units there? What is the average rent that you're charging them?
$1.50 a square foot. So our rent
$1.50 a square foot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So
and what's the average house there? 200?
9 by 20. So
180. So that's $270 a month that they're paying. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep. Most of our folks live on $200 a month. So we're serving the 0 to 10% area median income. I mean, this is the poorest of the poor of our society. So that's why we sort of create these work credits so that they can keep more cash in their pocket. Contribute.
So if they're paying $270 and they can get $150 in work credit, then they would only be paying $120 a month.
Yeah.
Is that?
And that's enough for us to cover the increased operational costs, because we are always partnering with the local church. The building already exists. The church has paid off that land, or has paid off is already paying it off. They already have lights and utilities. So the increase is sort of nominal, which makes this really, really affordable. Our development, when we add in the cost of renovating the land and the building, is less than $60,000 per unit development. And that includes the cost of the tiny home as well.
So wait a minute, the building, they already have the building, did you say? Or are you building?
No, so part of the model is such that we partner with the local church because their land is protected under the federal land use law, but also that we use or renovate a portion of their building to become that common house. So they can have
the common house. Okay.
Laundry,
and what's in the common house?
Bathrooms, showers, laundry, kitchen, meeting space, living room, and dining space.
So basically what they have is a bedroom that's on wheels then, and everything else is in the common area.
For the design of our tiny home, we read through 200 post-occupancy surveys of people that were coming out of chronic homelessness, living in tiny homes developed by middle and upper class white architects. It was incredibly informative for us. The designs that were made came from a white middle class sort of sensibility, where my bed is going to roll up and my table is going to come down, and then I'm going to be able to do yoga like in the middle of my space. Like, that isn't even on the radar of our folks who have been living in tents and under bridges for a decade. They want the bed to be the bed, and they want the table to be the table. Like everything about their life has been really transitional and temporary. And so to offer someone something really permanent, even though these are on wheels, I mean, the only reason they're on wheels is so we can overcome building code. Building code is highly inflexible, right?
Yeah.
And so that we can.
So what's in a tiny house? What's in one of these tiny houses? How does it lay out?
Yeah. So our tiny home is from feedback of the post-occupancy surveys, we heard that people want, it feels bigger if there's at least 2 distinct spaces. So we have a half wall that sort of separates the bedroom from the rest of the space, and then another half wall that separates the bathroom. But otherwise, it's a pretty open floor plan. There's 2 storage lofts on either end of the home. There's a very long counter space. There's a water, gravity-fed water tank with a sink and then a catch basin below. The catch basin can be emptied into the greenhouse or garden beds during our 4 months of warm weather here. Or when it's freezing and cold here, it can be emptied into our dry compost toilet. I'm sorry, not dry. How would I call this? It's a dehydrating compost toilet. So we worked with an aerospace engineer to develop a toilet specifically for sacred settlements. It runs on about $2 a month, a small little motor that dehydrates the deposit and goes to a catch basin below the tiny home. And so that means that our folks can make a simple meal in their home, wash their hands, go potty, sort of do just, daily tasks within the home. But then there's also that common house that is really twofold: reduces our development costs, our overall development costs, by not bringing sewer and water to every home, and then also encourages routine interactions among neighbors. Good design has to foster community, or community needs to be fostered by good design. And so that common house is just a place where people can organically sort of gather, share a meal, do puzzles together. And all of that happens in these communities.
I'm interested in that toilet that you were talking about.
I'll connect you with Larry Ball. He's incredible.
Yeah, if you could get us some information, we'd like to put that out on that may be a good blog, Leanne. Talk about that. That would be a lot, very interesting. Yeah, David gives us a thumbs up too. And so, yeah, we'd like to find out some more about that. And apparently in cold weather, this toilet has enough wherever the water is going. Once you pour it into the toilet, it's going into some kind of a catch basin that doesn't freeze. It must be somewhere where it's in the heated space of the house itself.
You got it. There's 2 chambers. So the first one is in the home, heated, and it is rotating to dehydrate the deposit. And then after it's dehydrated, it falls into a third chamber that's below the house. And that needs to be emptied about once a year. And then that actually can be burned into in a special oven that can be built for about $200 and turned into biochar. Biochar is a really nutrient dense fertilizer that you can then use on your garden. So wow. Imagine that, using waste and turning it into something really life-giving and fruitful. Yeah.
Great. Good job. I mean, that technology is just amazing. I'm telling you, I'm impressed. I'm impressed. I want to find out more about that. But anyway, sorry. So anyway, so you decided that you wanted to create this business model. I understand you had some difficulty getting the buy-in from the commissioners on getting this done. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So in our metro, we have a seven county-wide we have 7 counties in our metro. So that means 7 distinct policies, leadership, social services. It's incredibly bureaucratic. But actually our county commissioners were on board with this because they are the ones, it comes out of their budgets for social services, and they know that people on the streets, maintaining someone's homelessness is really expensive. So they were really
we had
board.
an article here in Orlando a few years ago, and every homeless person costs the city $30,000 a year in calls to the police department, to ambulance, into the emergency rooms, and this whole study was proving to the commissioners that homelessness costs, even though they're living in the woods, it still costs the city a lot of money.
Absolutely. And that's a very, very, very conservative number. I've seen research that shows that it's about $35,000 to $150,000 per person per year. It's not like any of that's ending up in their hands. It's just that we keep maintaining status quo, and all the emergency services and responses are really expensive. So it would be advantageous for us as a society to be thoughtful about how we really respond to homelessness. And our big thesis is that it's not just housing and social services. If you've been on the streets for years, you've lost family and community, and that's what we need to be building. So the county commissioners were on board with that. Even the city council. So St. Paul is the capital city of Minnesota. Our city council was on board with this. Really, where the rub was the city regulators. There was just no box to check, and they like to check boxes. It's their job. And so there was no zoning box to check for like intentional tiny home community. And there was no box to check with tiny house on wheels. And we're like, but NOAA, like, look, the NOAA standard. And they're like, we don't know NOAA. And we're like, we'll get to know NOAA. And so I think that we did like really try to encourage those meetings. And I thank you for every sort of communication that you guys did, because you, your whole like intent and mission is to really elevate this type of housing as a new form of housing that can be seen as a quality housing stock, and add to the affordable housing stock. But just getting the regulators on board with that was really, really challenging. They didn't really want to touch zoning because of the Religious Land Use Act, and because they'd been sued by a church about 2 years prior to us starting conversations with them, and lost that lawsuit in a federal decision. So the zoning they didn't really touch, but it was the building code that they just sort of kept kind of hammering us on. I think in any city where camping is allowed, it would be very easy to overcome the zoning, because you would just say, this is just like a campground in your city. But in the city of St. Paul, campgrounds are not allowed. And so we were saying, these are licensed as a recreational vehicle with the state of Minnesota. And they were saying, we don't allow anyone to live in a recreational vehicle, even for a day, in the city of St. Paul. Go to another city. And so that was really where the rub was. And we're like, hey, we're trying to be a blessing to you. We're trying to help our like the most expensive to the public and add new housing stock. And so we just did we just knocked on their doors over and over and over and over, and invited them to come and see the homes, have Q&As with us, have questions, meet people, bring, our folks that were going to be moving into the communities to meet them and share their stories. It was a long, lengthy process from the moment that we knew which church we were going to plant the first sacred settlement at to the moment that we gained final approval or occupancy was 30 months. I guess as I say that, it doesn't seem so long, but 30 months of banging on doors.
Yeah,
And
that's
we
2.5
really,
years.
yeah, it's a long time. And we really did all the legwork. We heard over and over and over, well, this would require our staff, this would require 500 hours of work for our staff. And, why would we put the time into that? So we had a really beautiful pro bono legal team that did all the land use analysis and all the building code analysis to show how a tiny house on wheels could fit into sort of the existing plan. They're pretty brilliant. They came up with 3 different plans. One of them was using sort of the Emergency Response Act. Another one used sort of like the state campground regulations. And then a third one just offered a new, a brand new ordinance that would be added into the city, because there was something on the books that said that if you were testing something that was brand new, you could have you could vote in this ordinance to allow for it to happen. So our lawyers found that little tiny thing in the code, and that was it was the 3rd proposal that we brought to the city, and that was the one that they latched onto. So
That's called, I think it's called experimental housing. Is that what it's called?
That's it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about all of this is that they did not want the seals from NOAA to say NOAA Plus or anything. They wanted them to say RV. Is that right?
That's right.
And that's wild and crazy, because an RV, you only have to have an R5 in the walls and the floors and an R7 in the ceilings insulation. And in a cold climate like that, man, that's just not going to work. So they really needed a NOAA Plus standard or some kind of a plus to the RV standard in order to make that happen. Are you building your tiny houses to the RV standard, or are you building them to the NOAA Plus standard?
Would we even be able to get a certification from you if we were building to the RV standard? No, I think that we're at a NOAA plus standard. We've built these to a really, really insulated, we are only a couple 100 miles south of the Canadian border. It's very cold here. It's not uncommon for us to have negative 20-degree weather for a week or more. And so we needed to build it to that high standard. And we're thankful that the NOAA certification allowed for that and allowed such great documentation to show. And I think that the rigor of the inspection process that NOAA provides gave the regulators some confidence that we weren't putting people in shacks. Now, they didn't know what to do with the wheels, and they didn't know what to do with the size, and there still wasn't a box to check, but sort of miraculously at the end of the day, because the city council passed this ordinance, they were sort of allowing for this to fall under that experimental housing.
That's an interesting thing, Leanne. If we can get a copy of that ordinance, that would be useful to other communities that are trying to do the same thing. But I've heard of that being successful in a lot of communities, that writing the ordinance for experimental housing. So yeah, good job. And it's unfortunate that you had to go 3 times before you could get there. If you just started out with that, if you'd known, you would have just started out with that and gotten it through. But yeah, kudos for that. So David's got his hand up there. David, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I've got a question. Because my other line of work is I do production work for churches all around the country. So I have I have a lot of church clients that are all over the US. And I've got one that I've been working with that has been trying to figure out a way. Again, I mentioned it to him or gave him the idea. They're a kind of a destination style church where they have probably about 500 visitors from out of town every single weekend. And they fill up all the local hotels, and they're constantly paying hotels for people that can't afford the travel. And then I was like, what if we did like some type of a tiny house community on the property? They got about 5 acres in the back up on a hill. And I was like, maybe there's an idea to do like a little tiny house community and do a thing where, can promote where if somebody stays there and pays rent, like say for 2 nights, it gives someone else a free night rent that can't afford it or something like that. And then we kind of tossed that around to a few people, and they were that travel and go there, and everybody was really into it, because they'd rather pay the church and then have it where it's an open place for someone else to stay versus just staying in a random hotel for a night or two, but then just staying on the property. So that's where I was wondering, I just wasn't sure on any regulations, say if that matters, if it's more like a Airbnb style versus a permanent housing, like for, low income or something like that. I don't know if there's any legal, anything against that.
Yeah, they'd have to be able to like justify in a court of law that the way that they're using their land is in conjunction with their mission. And so it's very easy to justify, like, care for your neighbor as you care for yourself, care for, the poor, the foreigner, but as long as they had like a, sort of like a strong resolve that putting this on their land really emphasized and bolstered their mission, then I think that they could lean on the Religious Land Use Act. It's not a slam dunk. It's not like you can just go to the city and say, we're using the Religious Land Use Act, you have to let us do this. Like I share, it took 30 months for us to come up with a way of working with the city. But we always knew that we could lean on the Religious Land Use Act if we needed to. If it ended in that way, it didn't, and I'm thankful for that. We didn't need to have a lawsuit or any of that. The city chose to work with us, probably because they had been sued already under that law. I've never met a church that knows about the Religious Land Use Act, and I've not met cities that know about it. So there's a lot of education around it, like a huge education piece. And again, sort of bringing that work to the city, because they're just not going to do the work themselves. Like, we had to do all that land use analysis, but it's a strong strategy.
Yeah, I'm gonna as I go up there in about
David.
a month to work there, then I'm going to talk to them about it, because they're still trying to figure out a way, because there's just not enough it's just kind of weird, there's not enough hotels really locally that can even support them right now on the weekend. They book all the local hotels out every weekend, and that would be a cool idea to do that, and do just some little ones, and either like some 8x16s or something. It just needs to be for someone to stay for a couple nights, and they wouldn't care how nice it is necessarily, if it would, especially if it'll help someone else, say the following weekend, that can't afford to stay there, because they're constantly paying for hotels, booking hotels out for people that just are reaching out that are barely, they're paying gas money and stuff to come and all that. So just trying to think of a way that keeps the money in house in the church, but yet helps everybody else out at the same time,
Yep.
So
I like it.
Okay, I'll look at that. Okay.
My thinking there, David, is what's the mission of the church? Well, obviously, if people are coming to stay in the tiny houses to go to the church service or whatever that's going on there, that is the mission of the church, to reach out to the non-believers and also the believers, and encourage believers and reach out to the believers. And I mean, that is the mission. So I could see where, being a transient type of a church where a lot of people come through transient type people, that something like that could be argued in a court of law. And I like what Gabrielle is saying, that that's your last resort. If you know you have that, you can go boldly and say, well, why don't we just go with this ordinance? Let's just make a experimental community here and go with this experimental ordinance. And here's a template of that experimental ordinance, so you don't have to write the whole thing. And we have you might even look up the attorneys that Gabrielle used, or similar attorneys that would be able to back you up, to draw up the things that you need to do for that. So anyway, yeah, I like your way of thinking. And if you're connected with a lot of other churches, once you've done it once, you can do it again and again. And this could be a scalable model for you around the country. And I think that's what Gabrielle's looking for too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, in fact,
also look at if they can have campgrounds as, because that is sort of, I don't know, Robin, if you agree with this, but I feel like if a city allows for a campground in already, then just using something that already exists, that there's already a box and regulations, and just meeting those requirements. Yeah,
that's a good point. It's a good point. All right. Well, let's see. So where were we? You've gotten this approval. How many have you built so far?
Well, how many homes have we built? We've built 12 homes, I suppose. So our strategy has really been to have each home sponsored by a different faith community, to also invite those congregations in. Maybe they're not ready to be talking about having a sacred settlement on their land. Maybe they don't have land, or maybe that's not even on their radar, but they can sponsor a home. And what we found that's been highly successful is if they build the home on their land, in front of their congregation. And so over the last 4 years, we've worked with NOAA. So we've had 4 build seasons, started with one tiny home the first year, and then 3 to 6 each year after that, I suppose. So we've built about 12. The first community that we opened up has 6 homes on it. 2 are for intentional neighbors, and then 4 are homes filled with people coming out of chronic homelessness. That community was opened up just this past October. I'm sitting in one of the classrooms at that community. It's really incredible and beautiful what's happening there. And then we just opened up our second sacred settlement on the heels of that last month. It's at, so the first one was in St. Paul. This next one is in a first ring suburb. It's just 2 homes, 1 intentional family, husband, wife, child, and then a woman coming out of chronic homelessness living there. Renovated a classroom into the common home. The church already had kitchens, bathrooms, showers. So it was really inexpensive to just run some electricity underground to the homes and put them there. Because we already had the homes built, we were able to do it really, really quickly. We have another 3 homes at our warehouse. We have a sort of a production center for building tiny homes. We have 3 of them there. That are fully built and furnished. And so we always have them on display to just bring people through, show people what this is, what the model is, what the homes look like. Gosh, people have become tiny home enthusiasts. So it's always fun to come and look at them. And then
so let me get this straight. You're having other churches, not the host church, but other churches actually funding the builds on these tiny houses that are going to be placed in the host church. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Wow. And the build goes on the funding church's property?
Yeah, we didn't find that. We didn't realize that the first build season. We didn't realize like how powerful that would be. The second build season, it was the beginning of the pandemic, and a church reached out to us and said, all of our missions trips have all been canceled and we have nothing like to engage our congregation. Can we build a tiny home on our property, on our land, and just call it a parking lot mission trip? And we said, Sure. So they built it on their property. It's still our design, still inspected by NOAA, still built to that really high quality. But then it was their volunteers. It was their oversight. It was them sort of managing logistics of getting materials delivered and returning things at the end of it. So it took an enormous amount of overhead in terms of like staff off of our plates, and then also invited a whole congregation into building this home. Yeah, there was probably like 5 or 6 main builders that really made the thing happen. But I would say now that we've done this many times, we've come up with strategies to get the youth, have a youth day where youth come out and build, something at their skill level, have family night where families are coming out and building, the window boxes or the birdhouses, have staff enrichment day where the staff come out and all figure out how to build a deck, have a hospitality team that comes and brings lunches, have a lunch and learn for every Saturday build, so that you can also, have your congregation come learn more about homelessness or, whatever you're teaching on. So literally to engage hundreds of people in your congregation instead of, a handful of people to volunteer to build the home. So that's been a really key strategy of just building awareness and deepening empathy and questions and curiosity and engagement.
Wow. That's fantastic, Gabrielle. Well, look, we just have a few more minutes left. Is there anything else you'd like to enlighten us with before we close these things out? I know I've done some of the talking, but was there anything else that I missed that maybe you need to go into?
I'm grateful that there is a whole movement around tiny homes and sort of innovation and initiative and, forerunners in thinking about how can we provide quality housing that's truly affordable and really is going to meet the needs. Now, obviously, I'm sure that you guys hear this plenty that it's not a silver bullet. Obviously, it's not going to solve all of our housing crisis. It's not going to solve all of homelessness, but it is a legitimate response, and having a sort of a community nationally and having a national standard that we can all come under and say, this is what we're doing. This is that high quality that we're bringing to our states, to our nation. And that sort of the ingenuity and pioneering of that is really beautiful. And then to couple that, I think, with community. I mean, I know that sort of the romanticism of the tiny home living is often that you're like alone on this like peaceful land, like all by yourself. But also, I think that the tiny home movement really lends itself to intentional community. If you can have a common house in which you can sort of is an extension of your home and gather around, so that you have your own individual personal space, but you also have this space of gathering in larger groups, because I really feel like that's part of it, is yes, living simpler, living more affordably, but also living interdependent with one another and living communally is something that we is wonderful to aspire to and enriches all of our lives. So I'm thankful, Noah, for your part in allowing all of us to sort of manifest that in our own communities. So we're thankful for your organization. Thank you, Robin, for your vision and leadership in sort of creating a standard that we can all adhere to and point to and be proud of.
Well, Gabrielle, we really appreciate you and all the efforts that you put forth too, and people like you that are out there making it all happen. Without you, there wouldn't be any need for a NOAA. And so we really appreciate not only the things that you're doing, for the homeless, chronic homeless, 10 years or more. But also, there's communities out there for those that have homes, but they just want to downsize and they want to get smaller. And there's a lot of ideas, and the things that you're putting forth here in ideas and the work that you've done, the groundwork that you've already laid is going to be something that other people, a foundation that other people could stand on and bring the same type of thing into their community. So we really appreciate you, spending some time with us this today. And I'm going to say, if there's any questions, need to ask them now, because I am turning things back over to Leanne to kind of wrap us up.
Does anybody have any questions? Kat says, thank you.
Yeah,
I did put in the chat the Settled website. It's settled.org. If you want to go check it out and keep up with their story, you can subscribe to their newsletter, which I have done, so I can keep up with all the news. So I just really want to say thank you so much, Gabrielle, for being with us. I know you're a busy lady, and just really want to say thank you for all that you do. And I know more great things are going to happen for you guys. And just really enjoyed your talk with us. I learned a lot that I didn't know. So just want to say thanks again for coming and being with us. And the rest of the speakers this week are going to have to really step it up, because that was just a great presentation. So thanks for being with us. Happy Monday night, everybody. And we'll look forward to helping you with your next builds. And tomorrow, Tuesday, we will have Mr. Bill Taha back. He'll be doing part 2 of his presentation. So tune in tomorrow at same time, same place. You guys have a fabulous night. Thanks again, Gabrielle.
Thank you, guys.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Bye.